he did confirm that, yes, he is absolutely looking at filling in part of Lake Ontario in downtown Toronto to build a 2 million square foot convention center.
Welcome back to Closer Look on this Monday, the 9th day of March. Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief, is here. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Zach Trunzo in for Derek Turner today. Time change. How you feeling?
Hey, did Derek not survive the time change? Is that what happened? What happened to Derek? Turned the clock ahead an hour and that was it?
He's had a good run. No, he had some stuff to deal with.
You know, like I said on our show Friday, we had an expert from York University on, and she was excellent. I never gave more than 5 seconds of thought to daylight saving. I never thought. I did what I was told. I turned my clock back when they said, turned it forward when they said. Yeah. I never really thought about it. I assumed, of course, it had to do with farmers. That's what everybody always thought was the old wives' tale of the farmers. Sure, yeah. So, okay, yeah, whatever. Obviously, that's not the case. That's a total myth. And I learned a lot from that conversation, and it really had me thinking about just how stupid daylight savings time is, to be honest, right?
It really is.
And this whole idea that BC has adopted this as full time, but that in the winter they're not going to have sunlight till 9 a.m.
It's crazy. I thought about that this morning driving in because I get here a little bit earlier than you do.
Yes.
And it was dark, like headlights on.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you have your headlights on?
I absolutely did.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a fan.
Well, the good professor on Friday talked about how, like, you know, the first couple of days after turning your clocks, there's increase in traffic accidents.
Stroke.
Judges are angry, so they're giving harsher sentences.
Yep. And
people are just feeling kind of groggy and tired. And it's true. You lose that 1 hour, and you don't think about it, but it does make a big difference.
I don't know how 1 hour can have the impact that it does. First of all, yesterday I found just dragged on like crazy, which is weird.
Yeah.
And then this morning, you know, around 6:45, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I just felt like I could have slept another 2 hours.
So just so everyone knows, Scott's taking the rest of the week off.
That's right.
He's put in for some vacation or maybe sick days. I don't know what it is he put in.
I haven't figured it out yet, but we'll manipulate the paperwork.
All right.
Anyway, that was Patricia Lakin Thomas
sorry,
from York.
I forgot her
No,
name.
it's all good. Wonderful guest. And you can tell clearly that she is the brains behind all of this because every media outlet.
Yeah, and if you didn't watch the show, I'd recommend going back to see it, even though you've already changed your clocks. You turned your clocks ahead because there's kind of like an inner circle of these experts who've been talking and strategizing. Remember we said
I know.
She expected to get a lot of media calls. Her and her colleagues who are in this world, right?
Yeah.
She operates what's called the Clock Lab at York University, which is an amazing name for your research laboratory. So check it out.
It's Clock Lab. Secret group of people, right?
And they study how our kind of our biological clocks, how we tick, how our bodies work, and how it correlates to time and sunlight and moonlight and all kinds of crazy things. It's fascinating. It's amazing. You learn people do all kinds of different things, Scott.
All right.
Maybe they can help with the construction of this new convention center if we get it on time.
I read Jack Howen's story over the weekend about the premier. Now, he says, look, I don't want to build an island, but I want to throw a bunch of dirt into Lake Ontario so that I can eventually build a new convention center.
So it's like an island.
It's like an island. I mean, it's not an island, but...
I had to refresh my memories. Jack's story was great, and when I went back and read from a couple weeks earlier, so the premier's kind of been on this kick about we need a new convention center in downtown Toronto. The other one's way too small. We're not attracting enough events. So there were a lot of reports from various news outlets about how they're looking at Exhibition Place, they're looking at some other pieces of land. And then on Thursday, the Globe and Mail exclusively reported that he's quoting unnamed sources that the premier is really looking into this idea of dumping a bunch of fill into part of Lake Ontario and building it on top of that. And then the premier kind of didn't shy away from that on Friday during a press conference. So it's kind of evolved into this So we're going to talk to Jack about, sort of what's the big deal, why the premier is so fixated right now with the convention center, whether he's right, and whether this plan to fill up the lake has any reality in it. We'll put it right beside the 401 tunnel.
Premier Doug Ford has never been shy about thinking big, but his latest idea might be one of the biggest yet, literally. The premier says he's exploring a plan to fill in part of Lake Ontario along Toronto's waterfront to create new land for a massive convention center, something he says the city desperately needs because the existing Metro Toronto Convention Center simply can't compete for the world's largest events. The proposal is still just an idea, but it raises some big questions. Jack Howen from our Queen's Park team at the Trillium has been reporting on this story and joins us from Toronto tonight. Jack, welcome to the show. Good to see you as always.
You too.
All right, let's start from the beginning here. Jack, all this talk about a new convention center began last week when the Premier promised some shock and awe architecture for a new space that would be 5 times bigger than the current convention center. What triggered all this talk about a new facility, and why is Ford so keen on this?
Yeah, like many proposals from this government, it comes during a press conference, and this is how these things start. The Premier mentions it and outlines the problem at every opportunity. And as far as he's concerned, I mean, you covered it in the intro. We're missing out on conventions to the States, to other bigger convention centers. And certainly the Premier has made no secret of being pro-business and, having the ear of the business community and vice versa. So, I don't know who he's been talking to behind the scenes, but that would certainly seem to be behind the push.
Am I right that he mentioned this first at the mining conference that was going on? Is that right, that one?
Yeah, I believe that's right. I think that was the first time.
That makes sense. Okay. Is he right, Jack, that the convention center there in Toronto isn't living up to its potential? Did the numbers back him up on that? Yeah,
he is right. And this is something we can say because the Auditor General reported on it in 2023. She found it had no longer had enough space to host the biggest conventions. And something the Premier has repeated is that we're among the worst major cities, and that was also found in the AG's report. We were 18th out of 21 among a sample of North American convention centers. So yeah, it's not as big as it needs to be to host the biggest conventions.
Okay, Jack, we'll get into the Ontario Place location because that's what everyone's been talking about. But before we do, what are some of the other locations being tossed around?
The Globe was the first to report on the island plan, which the Premier, I should note, disputes that it would be an island, more filling in the lake. But in their story, they mentioned that sources had told them that the province is considering the East Harbour development site just east of the Don River. That would be on the future Ontario Line subway, and there's a bunch of plans around that area. Also in the Portlands area. Again, a ton of plans for housing and employment space there. And then also Exhibition Place, which is owned by the city, but would also be on the Ontario Line. Mm-hmm. And that last one also has existing convention facilities that could beef up.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about the reaction to the Globe story. Obviously, I think on Friday there was a press conference where the Premier addressed it. What was he asked, and how did he respond?
It was a scrum, I believe, and they asked, are you considering building an island? And he said, well, I wouldn't call it an island. So he did confirm that, yes, he is absolutely looking at filling in part of Lake Ontario in downtown Toronto to build a 2 million square foot convention center. As he said, it would be shock and awe. And like you said, it's still just an idea. Mm-hmm. There haven't been any environmental scans, the Premier says, so far, but it seems to be something he's taking seriously.
Mm-hmm. Jack, so what exactly is Premier Ford envisioning here? Are we talking about a small extension of land or something that would dramatically reshape the waterfront?
So shock and awe, implies something pretty big, I guess. But he has attached the number to it, which is 2 million square feet, mm-hmm. Which is quite large. It depends on how high it is, what it'll look like, whether we're going for a, Dubai Palm Island sort of thing, or just an extension to the existing land. Obviously, everything depends on the plan, but it will be big if indeed it is built there, and would definitely change how that spot looks.
Here's my dumb question for the day, Jack. The Premier said that the province already has, quote, a tremendous amount of fill. Where is that material coming from? Where do they have all this fill?
So that would be from, I don't know where it is currently. That's a great question, but that would be from all the tunneled transit projects. Mm-hmm. They've been digging up so much earth to build the Ontario line and the Eglinton LRT kilometers of tunneling. So he's right. Yeah, they must have, that must be somewhere. And the other thing he said is that we need more land. We need more land. So whether he means specifically for the convention center or just in general, we have the fill, presumably, to do it.
So here's an idea. When he starts digging the tunnel for the 401, he could take that fill and use it to build his non-island.
That could work. I don't the timing goes. That probably wouldn't work.
Could build another Toronto with that fill.
that'd be a lot of fill for sure. All right, here's the real question too: the cost, right, Jack? Who foots the bill for a mega project? We're talking about, okay, we're going to build them wherever they build it, whether it be they fill the lake or not. They're going to build a 2 million square foot convention center. The premier wants to. Who foots the bill for that? Is that all the province?
Well, this is the fun part of making announcements in press conferences and through anonymous sources, is that who knows where the bill is coming from. Ford is the premier's positioned himself as the cheerleader and the guy who wants this done. So presumably that would put the province on the hook for at least most of it. But, he says he's talked to the mayor's office and potentially he's talked to the feds as well. I don't know. But we don't have any details about how much it would cost, but it would be a lot. It would be billions of dollars for sure to build a gigantic convention center of this scale.
Well, you mentioned the mayor's office, Jack, and the premier is saying that they've shown some support, yet the mayor's office is saying they haven't even seen a proposal yet. So what's really going on?
Yeah, so they both chose their words carefully there. Premier said that the mayor, Olivia Chow, he said she's endorsing it. Obviously, she hasn't formally endorsed anything. And as the mayor's office has said, they haven't received an actual proposal. What they didn't say was whether the mayor and the premier have chatted about it and what the mayor's reaction was in that theoretical informal chat. So, maybe they could both be right if a situation took place where the premier was like, hey, what do you think about this? And the mayor said, yeah, sounds good. But we don't know.
I know it's the opposition's job to have a field day with government announcements. Clearly, they've done that in this one, too. I think it was the Liberal leaders calling it Ford's Fantasy Island, I think. What has the reaction been from the opposition, Jack, and from others?
Yeah, it's more of the same for the reaction to the Ford government's major projects that the opposition doesn't agree with, which is that it will be insanely expensive, it will be billions of dollars, that the government would be spending when hospitals are falling apart and we need more nurses and the cost of everything is skyrocketing and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The government's response would be, you need to attract business and make business happy to have a tax base to fund all those things. But surely the opposition would say that spending billions of dollars not on necessities is not the right thing to do in current economic climes.
It's a great segue to the next question. I know one professor in some of the coverage called the island proposal insane, but I think that was from an engineering perspective, I think. But there's also the question of whether there's actually a market for these big convention centers, that there's enough demand to fill them. What do you know about that? What are you hearing?
Yeah, it's that professor's quote reminded me of a quote that my editor Jessica Smith-Cross got when the premier first floated the 401 tunnel, where she talked to a tunneling expert and he just went, wow, that would be a big tunnel.
And that's a tunneling expert.
Tunneling expert.
That's crazy.
Astounded at the size of this tunnel. It's hard to tell whether it was like wistful or thought. Anyway. I haven't seen many super pro convention center takes. I mentioned, at the outset of this podcast that the premier is right that the current convention center is too small to host the biggest conventions, but the demand for big conventions has been falling for years. And, it's definitely a question of whether Toronto should be even competing for those conventions, especially if it comes at the cost of billions and billions of dollars to build a convention center for it. John Michael McGrath, a very smart writer for TVO, compared building convention centers to sports stadiums as two things that make governments sort of lose their minds when it comes to funding major projects for minimal gain. I don't know how accurate that is, but it rang true certainly, especially with how the premier's been positioning it.
It's a great point. Just remind me, it's been a while since I've been to the Metro Toronto Convention Center. I mean, is it as bad as everyone's saying it is?
I certainly am not a convention aficionado, but the Premier does have a point that you do need to go up and down to get to certain places, and it is small if you're comparing it to the biggest convention centers in North America.
I'm sorry,
but it's not like it smells.
Yeah, that's right. It's not like this basement that we're sitting in right now. Any other reaction at all, Jack, that we didn't touch on, what people are saying about this? Obviously, I mean, because it's the talk everywhere. I'm seeing it on social media. I'm hearing it on talk radio.
Yeah.
What other things are people saying about it?
Yeah, I think we've covered it. The reaction that I've seen from experts is that it would be, insane to put it bluntly, and a big project to put it mildly. And people who follow conventions and these sorts of things definitely wonder whether we need it. And there have been plenty of tweets from Joe Schmo that are similar to, the 401 tunnel. That's like, this would be billions of dollars. And for what? Certainly, if and when it's completed, it would attract likely some of these gigantic conventions. But, the question is obviously the cost to get there.
Last question for me, and I think it might be unfair, and I'm sorry about that, Jack. But obviously, this kind of announcement comes on the heels of other announcements, like OSAP funding cuts, for example, right, which are triggering protests at Queen's Park, which are obviously impacting a lot of Ontarians in a negative way. How does Ford answer those questions when asked about, well, how can you do this when you're cutting over here? Yeah,
and basically it's he said, think of the OSAP cuts think of paying for education as an investment in your future. Mm-hmm. The lack of grants, you can't get a free ride. You need to be choosing the right courses. You can't be just suckling on the government's teat and taking basket weaving courses. One might quibble, obviously, with that interpretation of things, and whether we want an educated populace who can write essays, or whether we only want construction workers, which we certainly need. But yeah, he's framed it as a business decision, essentially, right? Like, you have to make the community happy in order to generate the taxes to pay for all the nice things. But in doing so, he's certainly positioned the government as less of an active participant in funding those things, like hospitals, like education, in order to facilitate things that would make the business community happier, like highways and a potential convention center.
All right, good stuff. Jack, anything else on this issue before we let you go?
I think that's all from me.
All right, good stuff. From the Trillium, there's reporter Jack Hound joining us from Toronto tonight. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks for having me.
I'm not going to lie here. When I heard Ford Fantasy Island, I pictured Tattoo on the edge of the dock, Boss the Plane. Do you remember that show?
I'm a little younger than you, but I do remember the show. I don't think I ever watched it.
Or Zach shaking his
Zach's
head
like, what are you talking about?
Fantasy Island, what is that?
I just, you know what?
Google it, Zach.
Yeah. I feel like convention center falls into that category of things we may or may not need in the next 5 years. The way the world is changing is like, people need, like, I guess they can have a conference on how I pay my OSAP loan back. That could be a conference.
Read the room.
Well, this is, I mean, I'm not an expert on any of this, but I just, who's getting we're less social than ever. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but we are. And I don't know, like, and maybe there are numbers out there. Is the Chicago Convention Center, for example, still filling up every week with massive,
I don't know,
massive conferences? And when was the last time you've been to a conference?
But do you wake up in the middle of the night and say, I've got it. Yeah. We'll build a new convention center. Yeah. The doctors, the schools, the highways. Mm-hmm. Let's just put a pin in that stuff.
I get what you're saying.
But a new convention center.
Well, I think Jack nailed it on the head, as he always does, is that, there's these competing interests, right? There is value in you want your local businesses to do well. So there's value if you can bring people in that, for sure. There's value in that. But he also mentioned the sporting arena now. That has always been the most controversial issue. People think it makes huge money. It doesn't. It's always a dud. Right? And there's all kinds of good research on that. So you have these competing entities that are looking for funding, right? I'm always interested in federal and provincial budgets, but I'm as interested as ever in when the next provincial budget comes out.
Definitely.
I think it's partially because we've talked to so many people on this show about competing interests, right?
For
about
sure.
What they're looking for funding for, and all making a great case for why it's important. I'll be anxious to see the convention center lobbyists come on next and
And budget, we understand, is towards the end of this month.
The end of this month, I believe, yeah. So we'll break that down as well.
We absolutely will. Closer look at villagemedia.ca. Reach out anytime. And, of course, you can sign up for our nightly newsletter, closerlookpodcast.ca. For Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief here at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for your time. We'll see you tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, right here on Closer Look.
Frisco and Scott's wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.